This is Bob Fitrakis bringing you the other side of the news, WGRN, the Green Renaissance, 94.1.
Death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
This episode of The Other Side of the News gives voice to the movement by many Columbus City school students fighting to remove Columbus police, or as they call themselves, school resource officers. This grassroots student-led movement has gained momentum in the wake of violent reaction by militarized riot police towards Black Lives Matter demonstrators. For more detail on this rapidly changing story, please read the article titled "No Air Conditioning But Plenty of Armed Police as Deadline for Columbus City School Passes" at the Columbus Free Press online at www.columbusfreepress.org. Link to this story is embedded in the description of this episode in the Other Side of the News playlist of Free Press Networks' YouTube channel. Please like, subscribe, and follow Dr. Bob Fitrakis as he takes you on the other side of the news.
Special treat this week, a couple of young activists, both inspired to activism while attending Columbus Alternative High School. So while at Columbus Alternative High School, they couldn't believe that the city would allow such disparity between the various schools and the districts. They complained of rats, roaches, and yes, police presence in the school. So they also noticed that many of the police that were allowed in the school at $1.3 million a year were often Black men, and wondered why there weren't other role models for other types of jobs brought into the school. Now, also, they've been active recently in the Black Lives Matter movement here in Columbus. As, again, Julia Allwine noted from her experience, quote, she says, "We were sitting and actually on the sidewalk when we were shot. They were indiscriminately firing at protesters who had been in an intersection, who then fled to the sidewalk, and the police kept firing." So they're veterans of the recent clashes between the Black Lives Matter movement and the police. We have two guests today, which will be offering us some unique insights. Angela Oye, Miss Oye, and Julia Allwine. Welcome to the other side of the news, and I'm going to let you guys do most of the talking. What would you like to tell our listeners, Ms. Oye?
Hello, my name is Sola Oye, like stated before. I'm an uprising junior at Howard University, and I'm a Columbus native, and I attended Columbus Alternative High School.
All right, and Julia? Ms. Allwine?
Hi, I'm Julia Allwine. I'm a rising junior at Ohio State University, and I also graduated from Columbus Alternative High School. And I went through Columbus City Schools K through 12.
Okay, so both of you being veterans of a school here in Columbus, there was a statement put out. What was the group that put the statement out?
CPD Out of CCS. It's what we're currently organizing. We're trying to get Columbus Police Department out of Columbus City Schools. So we created a letter to Columbus City Schools about how important and essential it is to remove that department from our institutions.
Okay, and I'm assuming this has something to do with the argument of the school to prison pipeline that we hear so much about. But nothing really is done, and that's grown dramatically in the last decades. So what was it like in the school? You, both of you were in the Columbus schools. So is there racism in the school coming from the police, the administration, the school board policies?
Yeah, Well, speaking from my perspective as a Black woman, I think there was obvious forms of racism going on in our schools, and I think with the policing in general gives the students a perception that the police are trying to overpower us, and they're trying to display how much power they have over students. And I think because of that, a lot of students feared their freedom in their schools, and instead of schools being a safe space, they became like I would say more like a war zone. I mean, I wouldn't say specifically for cause, but I know a lot of other students that I have spoken to, a lot of my friends that have had experience in different city schools within Columbus City have said that with police presence in their schools, they have seen the act of violence that has taken place and the racist perception that the police has of every Black student.
Ms. Allwine, what was your experience?
Yeah, I mean, obviously my perspective is a little bit different. And like Queen Sola said, like our experience at cause is different as well. But I think something that's really striking as we like continue this campaign is all the personal stories that are pouring out from other students. And I mean, it's devastating to like hear the effect that the cops are having on children as young as 6th grade, right? Because even though our officers are traditionally in our high schools, some of our high schools are connected to elementary or middle schools. And so we are surveilling and traumatizing students like as young as 6th grade. And I mean, that's just wrong. And CCS has the power to stop it right now. And so that's what our campaign is asking.
Yeah, and there was an attempt a few years back to try 4th graders as adults. They decided against it, but there was a huge movement to try kids as young as the 4th grade as adults. So it clearly starts very early. Let me read part of this group's statement. The police, quote, "The police have consistently been filmed and reported for introducing brutality and racism into classrooms and schools nationwide." Is there anything in particular, of incidents in Columbus or elsewhere that demonstrates this graphically?
Yeah.
Either of you, go ahead, Ms. Allwine.
Yeah, so actually linked in that sentence in our letter is an article that highlights 4 studies just alone in that article that talk about the nationwide harm that SROs or school resource officers cause. And then we also there are particular heinous actions. Like there's a police officer who punched a 13-year-old. This was not in Columbus, but it's obviously still devastating. So they punched a 13-year-old for cutting the line in the cafeteria, right? And that's the real problem. When the SROs are in school, they're increasing trauma, they're increasing harm, and also regular mistakes that children make become criminal offenses, right? Like they're just students, and all students make mistakes. But when an SRO is in school, that mistake can become deadly. And that's what's really an issue. And in Columbus City schools, or in Columbus in general, we have seen the CPD continually display a pattern of racism and violence. And even though this moment is showing it to us in an unprecedented way, Black students, Black organizers, they have been telling us for years. And we recently lost more than one Black man in the city due to police violence, and it's devastating.
Ms. Oye.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the stories, like I said, that have been shared to me, I don't know if the students would want me to publicly share that, so I can't say what they've gone through. But a lot of the experiences goes to show that the police department, time and time again, has been taught to be forceful with students. They will say the exact opposite. They will say, we don't pepper spray, we don't mace, we don't hit students with wooden bullets, when it goes to show that that's actually the opposite. And students do face these traumas that are continuous, and because of the way they are taught to view themselves and because of the way the police view them, that increases the school to prison pipeline and increases the amount of Black students especially going to prison.
And as part of the statement, you noted that from a district where 77% of student body is made up of minority students who are predominantly Black, this clearly sends a message to the minorities, to the Black students, that perhaps they don't matter, at least matter as much as the suburbs, right? You live, Are either of you familiar with the so-called win-win agreement that shaped Columbus policies from the top down, where they let developers have land in Columbus, but then they send the predominantly white students to suburban school districts and create a much more brutal and vicious district in the urban areas. There's been a long pattern of this. And also the private schools as well. You may know as well that in Finland, they're not allowed to have, they can only have public schools, and rich kids actually have to go to school with middle class and poor kids, and shockingly, they have the best schools in the world. I'm sure none of that surprises you. Is it an apartheid system, Ms. Oye? Are the Columbus public schools essentially skins apart, apartheid, a racist system?
Yeah, I argue that this is a racist system, and we've known time and time again. I think that when we look at the clear disparities between UA schools or Upper Arlington schools, Westerville schools, and Columbus City schools, we see that Black students are at a great disadvantage. And within Columbus City schools states that they only really have SROs in high school, but we see that SROs are really also in middle schools as young as 6th and 7th grade. And because of that, like placing a police in schools really gives the perception to students that they're violent at such a young age. And that perception is what leads to the like prison to school pipeline, and it's what leads to this ideology that Black students aren't able to take care of themselves or are unable to stop violence, or that they're too violent that they need a police officer in their presence. And we even also see that with Black students in Westerville. And Black students in Westerville also are always under attack with the police officers in their schools. So I think this is a racist system, and it's been a racist system way before I was born. I think that's why we're really fighting for the idea of removing CPD out of schools, because if we want to change the system, if we want to make a better way of living, we have to remove the rotten part of it, and the rotten part of it is CPD.
This is The Other Side of the News, streaming to you from the Indie Media Studios of the Free Press Network on YouTube, but also available online at WGRN.org. Plus, listen to us on Columbus, Ohio's 2 volunteer-run low-power FM radio stations, Friday at 5:30 p.m. on 94.1 FM, The Green Renaissance, and rebroadcasted Mondays at 4:30 p.m. on WCRS, the community radio station, both 92.7 and 98.3.
All right, Ms. Allwine, you spoke to our producer. You think the $1.3 million that's spent could be better spent in other ways?
Yes, absolutely. I think spending $1.3 million on anything besides a racist violent force is really money better spent. But specifically within our schools, like you named, we see there's a clear disparity between the suburbs and our district schools. Our buildings physically are falling apart. Our students don't have full-time counselors. They don't have full-time nurses. I can remember a time in high school when I got hurt on Tuesday, and it was just tough luck for me because the nurse wasn't there on Tuesday. And actually my father, who's an alumni, had the same experience when he was in school years ago. So we see that it's a consistent and continual issue. And like you were saying, right, with the win-win agreement, even though we don't know the specific name of that, like every city school student knows that the suburbs are valued in a way that we're not. It's evident when you enter a building in Dublin or a building in Worthington, and then you enter our building that's 100 years old, it's never been renovated, and it's falling apart, that one school system is valued over the other. And so continuing to spend $1.3 million on cops and police officers, instead of spending that money on social workers, on counselors, on enrichment programs, it sends a really clear message to the students that we value criminalizing them over investing in them. And that's tragic. Columbus City Schools has 55,000 of some of the most brilliant, incredible students. And instead of getting offered resources or assistance or support, they are offered people who have a pattern and a history of brutalizing Black people in the city. It's horrible. And that $1.3 million could go such a long way in a district that has so many pressing needs.
And the argument also, now, did both of you go to Columbus Alternative High School?
Yes.
It's also argued that not only is it a brutal racist apartheid system, it's also class-based, is that they give up, they create certain schools and the best students get to go there, but a lot of the schools, South High School made national news in 1995. 212 students went there, only 11 went to college that year. It was on PBS. So is there also a clear class-based element to this that disproportionately harms students in the long run?
Yeah, I definitely agree that there's a class base. And I think it even applies to cause students specifically, because I think when people think of cause, they separate us out of Columbus City schools, are like, they put us on such a higher level. And I think when people note to Black students at cause, they think of us like good Black kids, like tangible Black kids, Black kids that they can reform or change. That's what they view us as. But when you look at students at South or Marion or Linden, they think of them as violent, as bad, as students that they can't talk to. I mean, I think that's a clear class difference. Not even a class difference, but also it shows what we value as people, and what bodies we think are what bodies we think are important. So I think that's really important to address. And when I mean cause, I mean Columbus Alternative High School, sorry. But that's what is really important to address, because we only value Black students that are good to our perception. We don't value Black students that maybe didn't grow up in middle class neighborhoods, or that didn't grow up with both of their parents. A lot of people don't value that. And I think that's where we see the clear difference of the police violence going on in these schools. And even when there is a middle class system going on, the police are still violent. So I think it's really important for me, at least. I recognize my privilege of going to Columbus Alternative High School and having an experience where I was treated completely different. I mean, I still face racism, but I was treated completely different than the students at South, by their teachers, their counselors, or even by the college directors. And that's because of the school I was placed in. And if I was placed in any other situation, maybe South, Marion, Linden, then I wouldn't be provided that same experience. And I think that's why it's so important that we fight for those students to have the better experience than we all had, so that they can be more successful in the future.
Now, your group has a historical analysis of this, right? This starts in 1975, and I couldn't help thinking about a reaction against the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, when the Black community was at the peak of asserting its identity and its power. Suddenly, it looks like cops showed up in the school. Is that your argument? In part, how did this happen historically? Suddenly, there's no cops in the school. Suddenly, you need cops, and aggressive cops in the school. How does that happen historically?
Yeah. I would say that when we see the amount of cops that fled into school, like you said, during the civil rights movement, I think it's really because of how Black students are viewed. Black students are viewed as violent, incapable of controlling themselves. And they feel as though, and if we really go back, all the way back into slavery, Black people are viewed as animals. And then if we go back to the laws, like, we see that Black people are viewed as full humans. So because of that, because of this perception, this ideology people have of us, that is what they take out into schools, that is what they take out into their jobs, into healthcare work, and it just continues to go on. So because we're viewed as so violent and incapable of controlling ourselves, that's why they increase the amount of cops in our schools. And that makes sense. I mean, it makes sense of why they would do that, because they're scared of Black students, and they act as though Black students are unable to talk to counselors and express their emotions or, discuss what's going on. And that is the racist sentiments that they have of students that they don't know of, that have different backgrounds. And I think that's why it's so important to have trained counselors in schools that understand different backgrounds, because you can't go into a school where you have no idea what these students are going through. And I think that's what we're fighting for.
Ms. Holwine, any thoughts on history and cops flooding into the schools there in the mid-70s?
Yeah, I mean, I think drawing that connection to the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement is an important one to make, right? Like when we contextualize that, because of course, after that movement, we saw the growth in the school to prison pipeline and mass incarceration in general. And SROs serve a really important purpose in funneling those kids. Like Queen Sola said, when you get surveilled and traumatized as young as 6th grade, like and you're not hearing any other message at school, the place that's supposed to invest in you. I mean, it's incredibly damaging, and it certainly contributes towards funneling you towards a system that is cruel and horrible. And also the statistic you're mentioning, I think is just really interesting, because that statistic is that in 1975, only 1% of high schools had, or 1% of schools in general had SROs or officers in schools. And so I think it's important to name that, right? Because a lot of the questions we get are about student safety, right? Like, what will we do without officers? What about school fights? And the answer we like to give is, well, in 1975, students were the same. They were doing the same things. We had school fights in 1975. Like I said, my parents were at Columbus City Schools before there were school resource officers. And we dealt with all of those things, and we can certainly do it again. And we consistently see, like you say, the SROs are not serving the purpose to make our students safer, especially in a majority Black district. They're serving the purpose to funnel our students towards harmful systems. And so if we really want to stop the school to prison pipeline, mass incarceration, and that racism, and affirm that Black lives matter, which is really what CPD Out of CCS is about, then removing CPD is not the only step, but it's a very important first step.
Because I can't help but recall, since I went to school in this period, there was only about 100,000 people in prison, not the 2.4 million. And then there was what is now admitted to be an absolute bogus war on drugs. Public enemy number one, Richard Nixon, called it that. And there was almost an instant 7-fold increase from 1970 up to 77 into the prisons. And then that tripled massively, regardless of what political party, from the Reagan era. And a lot of it supposedly was, drug related. But the statistics showed that Black students actually engaged in far less illegal drugs than white students. And when white students, particularly suburban, would be involved in drug use, they wouldn't be charged and essentially have that hanging over their head and become targeted for the school to prison pipeline. So, I mean, is drugs and this, war on drugs at the same time, I would argue the CIA was allowing the drugs to come into this country. Is that a key element of it? I mean, it looks like this was constructed from the top down and just now is being directly challenged. What made you focus on this? In many ways, this seems almost the key issue because of early socialization. What would you say on that, Ms. Oye?
I think what made us focus on getting cops out of schools is because of how essential schools are to students. Like I stated many times when I talk about Columbus City Schools, I said that I think Columbus City Schools really shaped me, shaped who I am as a person, shaped who I am as an organizer and a future student wherever I go. And I think our institutions, I think our government knows that. We are in school 8 hours a day. Mostly throughout most of the year we're in school. We have 3 months out of school. And I think because of that, they know how influential having cops in school is and how that changes your idea of who you are. So I think it's so important for us. I think for me, it's so important to recognize that the government does everything strategically. Everything is there for a reason. And that's what we see in these schools and these neighborhoods, that everything is there for a reason. And it's to make Black students feel as though they're less than. And that's why everything was set like this. War on drugs, Nixon era, like everything is set for a reason. And this is why Black students are still facing these issues today.
All right, we got about 5 minutes left. I'll let both of you each take 2.5 of those minutes and call to action, say whatever you'd like on the other side of the news. Miss Allwine.
Yeah, I mean, just like Queen Soul was saying on the last question, like, I think we also chose this issue because like Columbus City Schools was so impactful on me. Like, there's no way I would be where I am without it. And I love Columbus City Schools, but when you love something, you recognize its flaws and you work to better it. And this is such an essential piece of bettering it. And just imagining all the amazing things Columbus City School students already produce and their ability to produce that without constant surveillance and trauma and harm at the hands of the police. I mean, who knows what the city would look like if we really empowered the students who live here. And with that in mind, you can follow both of our, our pages on Facebook and Instagram. Our Instagram is CPD Out of CCS, and our Facebook is Columbus Police Department out of Columbus City Schools to get updates, to get calls to action. And we have a really important date coming up, 6/16, which maybe Queen Solo wants to talk a little more about. But yeah, please stay updated on this. We need community members. We especially need students though. And like Queen Solo names, like Columbus Alternative High School, we're happy to represent it, but we need more than that. And so if you're a student listening or you're a parent who knows a student, we want voices from throughout the district. And you can find all those resources on our page on how to get involved. But we need those student voices because every student from Marion Franklin and Lyndon McKinley, you know, not just Columbus Alternative High School, deserves to be heard, and they need to be heard.
And so yeah, the last word.
Yeah, definitely. Like what Julia said, we need various voices from different schools, and we think that's really important. But on June 16th, there will be a board meeting with Columbus City Schools where they will be addressing these issues. And we are calling for speakers, for students to show out. You don't even have to speak, but even just being in the presence and listening to what they have to say, I think it's so important. And we will be having a call to action on what we will be doing at the board meeting, who will be talking. So just stay up to date with our page, Columbus Police Department out of Columbus City Schools, and follow us on Instagram, CPD Out of CCS, to see what we are doing and to stay informed about the upcoming board meeting.
All right, I appreciate your time and your struggle, and I have no doubt you will prevail. Thank you for being on the other side of the news.
Then hatred to mankind.
I want to thank John Lasker for co-producing this version of The Other Side of the News and arranging the interviews. Thank you, John.